Now, whether it's a modified suspension system, like in our new pickup truck, or you're dealing with a Malibu with a McPherson strut system, today on Tech Garage, we got you covered. It's all about suspension systems. Now, I'll meet you back at the garage as soon as I finish testing out this one. Welcome to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. Today we're going to talk about suspension systems and the drivetrain, components like the differential and CV axles. But let's get started with suspension. The function of the suspension system is to support the weight of the vehicle. It also has to cushion the ride, and most importantly, it's got to keep the tires in contact with the road. In order to do that, it's going to move thousands and thousands and thousands of times. That means that these components are going to wear out. So we're going to have to take you through different types of diagnostics so you can get out there and replace any of your suspension components. A couple terms you may have heard: sprung or unsprung weight. Now, unsprung weight is anything down here below the spring. If it's sprung weight, the spring is going to carry it up above. The manufacturers are making a big push to get all the unsprung weight lessened as much as they can, and that gives you a little better performance of ride. One other thing I want to talk about: independent suspension versus non-independent suspension. And this is an SLA system, and what that is, it's an independent suspension system. You can see here, this whole system, if I put the wheel on here and you hit a bump, it's not going to affect the other side at all. That's called independent suspension. On the other hand, this one, rigid axle from one side to the other, non-independent. Why? Because the wheel's over here. If it hits a bump, it's going to affect the other angle. So what we do is we look at all these components, and we'll start with the SLA system next. We're over here at our SLA suspension system. That stands for short, long arm suspension system. And yep, we cut one off a 96 S10 so we can show you every component that's on here. And it all starts right here at the upper control arm. The upper control arm is an SLA because it's the short arm on the short, long arm down here suspension system. This is the short arm, that's the long arm. But they're both control arms, sometimes called A-frames. You see it's connected to the frame all the way down here to the spindle assembly. In the middle, we have a spring right here. Now the spring's job is to control the vehicle ride height. So if your vehicle's sagging on one side or the other, it could be a spring issue. Inside the spring, you got the shock absorber. I got one right here, you can see. The shock absorber actually rides in that spring. Now what does a shock absorber do? Well, it keeps the tire in contact with the road, and it also controls spring oscillations. So if your car's bouncing like a baby buggy, it's probably time to check the shocks. Then we come over here to my sway bar. My sway bar has a couple of bushings right here that attaches to the frame, and then it comes over and it has the linkage that goes down and connects to the lower control arm. Sway bar keeps the car from swaying on turns from left to right. Maybe you have some squeaking noise or some rattling noise. Might be time to replace the bushings or the linkage that goes down to it. Now the last component involved here, the control arms connect with ball joints. These ball joints are mounted in the control arm and they go down into the spindle. And later we'll take a look at some ball joint wear and how we can check those. Now the good news is, no matter if it's a 96 S10 pickup truck or a 2015 pickup truck, it's still the same. The suspension's the same, and you can work on it. Let's go down here and take a look. You can see here, the upper control arm, no different, just a little different configuration, connected to the spindle, the lower control arms down below. Still bigger, still smaller. And then what we have here is we got our sway bar that attaches back here. You got your control arms on the end here, which are the ball joints, upper ball joint, lower ball joint, and then the spring and the shock absorber goes right through the middle. Now the only difference here is they got a little extender here. That's what got us up with that high riding 4x4. Now you can go out and test any one of these systems. You should be good with SLA suspension systems, but you know, you may have a McPherson strut system, and we'll take a look at that as soon as we come back from break with more Tech Garage presented by Advance Auto Parts.
Which suspension component is not considered a type of spring? A. Coil, B. Leaf, C. Shock, D. Torsion bar. The correct answer is C. Springs support the load of the vehicle and control ride height. Shock absorbers control spring and vehicle oscillations and are not typically considered a spring. This edition of Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts, is being brought to you by Moog Steering and Suspension. Make it easy, make it Moog. ARP, the world leader in fastener technology. Steel Rubber, quality crafted rubber parts and weather stripping. And by Advance Auto Parts. Let's get you back to the garage.
Welcome back to Tech Garage. Now, a popular suspension system is the McPherson strut suspension system, and there's a good likelihood you have one on your vehicle. So let's take a look at it. The McPherson strut attaches to the top of the frame of the vehicle, and then it goes all the way down and attaches to the spindle. Now it turns, there's a rotator plate right here. And what happens when you turn the wheel to the left or right, this rotator plate's gonna turn. So maybe you have a squeaking noise or a creaking noise, you wanna check out that rotator plate. You can see the spring, we talked about it earlier. It controls the shock oscillations. It's located between here, and then in the middle, you have a strut. Now the strut assembly goes in the middle of that spring and it bolts down to the spindle. But a strut's nothing more than a shock absorber. So let's take a look inside of a couple of shock absorbers so we can see how they work. This is a regular shock absorber. It has oil down here, and then what goes on, the oil passes through some orifices. And depending on the size of the orifice, I have an orifice tube right here. What happens is it allows it to flow. If I have a big orifice tube, it flows from one chamber to the other easily, and then it bounces real nice. But if it's real tight and small orifice, it's gonna be a restriction, and it's gonna go a lot slower. I also have a gas shock absorber. This is cool because I have a gas chamber down here, and then the oil sits between these two chambers. Well, what does that do? That keeps pressure up on that oil, so it doesn't aerate as it goes through those chambers. Shocks wear out too. The inner tube wears out, starts bleeding by. You can run a jounce or a bounce test, bounce your car on the fender, see if it comes back 2 or 3 times. If it's bouncing more than that, you have some issues. You want to check the mounts and check it for any external leaks. They can also rattle internally. You want to replace them. You know, a lot of cars in the junkyard still have the original equipment shock absorbers on it. Recommend replace about 50,000 miles. But this is one whole unit, this McPherson strut. So if you want to see how to take it apart, we're going to do that next.
And now the email question of the week, presented by Advance Auto Parts.
John, we've got an email question here from Mark in Raleigh, North Carolina. Now, Mark drives a 2009 Chevy Malibu that he says rattles in the front end, but primarily on bumpy roads. To the best of his ability, Mark got under the vehicle and checked everything, even put it up on ramps and says everything looks tight and secure. Now, this is right in line with what you're talking about today. What else can Mark check?
Brian, we just looked inside a shock absorber, and you know, they can rattle internally, or the rotator plate can be making some noise. Well, as long as the suspension system's all tight, I suspect it has something to do with the shock absorber. And before, Mark, you go taking apart any of those, we need to understand a little bit about them because there's a safety issue concerned. I have a whole strut assembly here, and what I did is I went and put it in this strut compressor. Why a strut compressor? Because this nut right here is under an immense amount of tension. That spring is under tension. Never, never, never take that nut out without compressing that spring. That's real dangerous. So what I can do is I got it secure in here. I'm gonna go down and squeeze it and actually compress it. When I do that, the strut unit itself is gonna become loose. So I'll go down and I'll run this down. Now it's gonna take a lot of pressure to do this because we're gonna press that spring down, and that's why you don't want to do it without having some strut compressor to keep you safe. And when I go down, I start squeezing that. Periodically, I'll come down and check my strut. It's still a little tight. All right, now it's ready to come out of there. So I can go ahead and take my gun, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that top nut off. When I take that top nut off, the strut all right, strut's loose, and then what I can do is I can pull it right out the bottom there. And this one's shot. This is old, you can see. Make sure you change over your hardware. Make sure you check your strut and line everything up with your spring. Another piece you can look at, Mark, is your upper rotator plate here. Make sure that it's not making any noise when it turns to the left or right, or that strut may be rattling internally. But you know, the good news, once again, there's a whole quick strut assembly that you can put in there and void all of this. But when you do a strut, remember, you're gonna have to get in alignment. Good look at a strut system. We need to do some diagnostics on a short, long arm suspension system. And we'll do that when we come back with more Tech Garage presented by Advance Auto Parts.
What procedure would be performed on most vehicles when replacing a McPherson strut assembly? A. Dry park test. B. Jounce or bounce test. C. Alignment. Or D. Dry park test. The correct answer is C. Struts are usually attached to the steering knuckle, which means most vehicles should be aligned after replacing a strut assembly to prevent abnormal tire wear.
Welcome back to Tech Garage presented by Advance Auto Parts. Now we got the suspension basics down, let's take it a little further. And we brought in an industry expert. From Federal Mogul Motor Parts, we have James Alterman here. You're the innovation manager for the Moog steering and suspension?
That's right.
You got a bunch of parts here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about them?
Well, at Moog, we're really all about making the parts not only easy to install, but also more durable than the original equipment product. And so I brought some products here today to kind of illustrate that and show you how you can, even the do-it-yourselfer can install these parts on your car.
Well, what do you have? I see some control arms, some links. Why don't we start with the control arm?
Sure. Well, one of the common concerns with the control arm is you may not, a do-it-yourselfer may not have access to a press. And it might be difficult to press that original ball joint out. Well, Moog has a complete line of control arms. So it's just as simple as removing the old control arm and putting the new control arm in. You get a new ball joint and new bushings. It's very easy, plug and play.
Yeah, now I've beaten and torched and hit some ball joints trying to get them out of there. It's not easy, so that's a pretty cool product. I see here also on a regular OEM, it's got the plastic bearing in here. I noticed earlier, what about your bearing?
Yeah, we've cross-sectioned these control arms so you can see what the internals, which you rarely see what the internals of the socket looks like. So you can see here with the Moog socket, it has all metal internals. And of course the metal bearings, this is our gusher bearing technology, gives you much better durability.
What's gusher bearing all about?
Well, a gusher bearing, it's actually a sintered metal, and it looks like just a rigid metal bearing, but in fact, it's porous like a sponge. So it absorbs the grease, and that grease keeps the bearing surfaces lubricated and flushes contamination away.
And that's what it does right here. You got this little demo. You can pump that, and it actually starts squirting out the stuff. That's the porous material and the actual grease coming out.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. Now I've worked with some sway bar links, and man, I've got a pry bar on there. They're not easy to attach. This was the coolest of all. What do you got there?
Yeah, this is our sway bar link. Let me show you what you've probably seen on a typical aftermarket bolt style link. You've got something like this, which when you go to install this, typically there's very few threads exposed from that last washer. You got to get a pry bar, you got to get the suspension compressed just so you can get this nut started. It is a real headache.
Sure is.
So we've come up with this unique barrel style nut, and you'll only find this on Moog products. It's a 1-inch long barrel that even if there's no threads exposed, it reaches down in there to grab those threads. It makes installing this so much easier. And in addition to that, we offer high-quality polyurethane bushings, so you get excellent durability from this product as well.
Well, that's a gold mine. If you're doing that out in the garage, that's the way to go. Now, another question. I know you have a relationship with NASCAR, and those cars are going on 150, 200 miles an hour. Those parts got to work.
Oh yeah, we're really excited. This year we're celebrating our 50th year with NASCAR. The last 49 champions have been using the Moog products. I brought one of the Moog NASCAR ball joints with me. You can see here, of course, this is a custom product that we make for NASCAR, but it does use some of the same technology that you can find in our Moog products for your passenger car and trucks, like the gusher bearing technology, the grease fittings, all metal socket. It's that sort of thing. So it's very durable, similar to the standards we use for our aftermarket products.
And that's cool, because I know a lot of our viewers, they actually listen to us. They listen to the technicians, and they make the products better, and they make them easier to use. Now, this is a heavy ball joint. I know you also give away a crew chief award. They can modify the car right in the middle of the race, finish the race, and they get a big prize, don't they?
Oh yeah, we're all about celebrating the problem solver. And in NASCAR, we reward the crew chief that exhibits the best problem solver strategy.
Well, these products will do that. You know, we'll keep you around here a little while. What I want to do is I want to go down to the pickup truck and I want to look at testing some suspension parts. We'll talk about some diagnosis. You help me out?
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll do that next. James, what's one of the first things you want to check?
Well, we want to look for any looseness in the ball joints. I've got an example of a loose ball joint here. Think of a ball joint just like your shoulder or hip. It's a ball and socket joint, and eventually it can get loose over time. So we want to check for any looseness in the ball joints.
And we can do that real simple. You can go out with a pry bar, pick up on the bottom of your tire, and just check it for looseness. Or there's a dry park test. Turn it to the right, turn it to the left, look for any buckling. But it's important, jack placement. If your spring's in the middle, get your control arm jacked up. If your spring's up here on the top, then you want to go ahead and jack it up on the frame because you don't want any tension on the ball joints when you're checking them. Now, I see you got the part here. Maybe you can show them where it goes.
Oh yeah, the link, essentially it connects the sway bar to the lower control arm, and you can see just how easy it is to install with our barrel style nut.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier. What else should we look for?
You should also look for any looseness in the bushings. Of course, there's two bushings here on either side of the control arm.
Oh, that's good, that's good. Hey, listen, we got everything down with suspension and components. We need to switch gears a little bit because we don't need suspension without a drivetrain and drive axles, and we'll do that when we return with more Tech Garage presented by Advance Auto Parts.
When checking ball joint wear, the load-carrying ball joint must be A, loaded, B, unloaded, C, removed, or D, pressed. The correct answer is B. When checking ball joint wear, you must determine which is the load-carrying ball joint. This is important because it must be unloaded before testing. This edition of Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts, is being brought to you by Moog Steering and Suspension. Make it easy, make it Moog. Custom Auto Sound, the originator of classic car OEM fit radios since 1977. Low-Car, quality plain and simple. And by Advance Auto Parts, let's get you back to the garage.
Welcome back to Tech Garage. Let's talk drivetrains. Now there's two types. The first one I want to look at are constant velocity joints or CV joints. Now what's going on here, it's an actual CV axle. This is a front wheel drive car. So it has a transaxle right here, and then the CV joint or the CV axle comes out of it and it goes all the way down over here to the spindle. Now I can run it and you can see it in action. As it's spinning, it comes out of the transmission and it goes right here to what's called a plunge joint. This changes effective lengths if the suspension moves. Then I come over to the outside here and this is a fixed joint. Well, if you turn the wheel back and forth to the left or right, that's going to be able to move but still transmit the power to the actual hub assembly you can see spinning here. It's splined into the hub and then there's a nut on the end holding it. I have one right here on the table that I can show you that's cutaway. Now what's going on? That outer joint is called the fixed joint. It turns, but it also transmits the power. The inside one, well, that's a plunge joint, in and out. So if the suspension's moving, it's allowed to change its effective length and not damage it. You want to check these boots. You can climb up under your car, look, make sure that they're not ripped, because once you get dirt in here, you may get a clicking noise. That's a symptom of a bad CV axle. You turn to the right or you turn to the left and you hear that clicking tick, 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 tick as you're turning, that's probably time to change your CV axle. Now you may be driving a rear wheel drive car and those usually have differentials, and we'll take a look at that now. Now ATEC sent us this differential that's a cutaway and you can look right inside and see what's going on. The drive shaft actually attaches right here, and what that does, it turns the pinion. The pinion's located right here, and then the pinion comes back and it contacts this ring gear, and that's what drives it. And I can do it right here and you can see it's turning the whole carrier assembly. Now these little gears inside, these are called spider gears or side gears, and that allows the wheels to turn at different speeds if I'm in a turn. You might find that you have some bearing noise or bearing issues. I'll give you a tip. You're going down the road and you hear that noise, well, change road surfaces because you don't know if it's a tire or a bearing. If it changes, then it's a tire. If the noise stays the same, it's most likely a bearing inside of here. And I can pull one of these axles out and show you. You can do this right out in the garage. What you want to do is first just come back here and take the cover off. That's the first thing, but you're going to have differential grease in there, so make sure you get a pan to catch it. This is just a demo. And then there's a bolt over here that actually holds a pin in. I'll go ahead and pull that out. And when I got that out, I'll move it up a little bit, push the axle towards the center, and I should be able to slide that pin right out. That's holding the axles in. Now, once I do that, I can go over here and push the axle in, and there's a little clip right here. And what this little clip does, it holds the axle in place. So if I spin that out of there, let's see if I can get that clip off. There it goes, it dropped right in. All right, and I'll show you that in a second, because now we can pull the whole axle out. Oh, that's a big one. All right, now, what I do, the clip was right here, and that was actually holding it in the gears. Now, I got one here that's actually worn. You can see it right here. This is all worn out right here. Well, there's an axle bearing in the end there. If that's worn out, you're gonna get a lot of noise. So you wanna go ahead and replace that. There's also some bearings on the inside. They can make noise too. Either way. Now, when you put it all back together, you just slide the axle in and reverse the procedure. Follow your manufacturer specification for all the torque specifications. Look at all your torque specs. And then just as importantly is the fluid. Now, this takes axle fluid, and in time, that axle fluid is going to deteriorate. It may just wear out, the additive package wears out. You want to go ahead and change that. You may have heard of a posi differential? Well, there's nothing more than just clutch packs in there. And what that clutch pack does, it actually holds both axles together, so when you go straight, both wheels drive. What you don't want to do is weld your spider gears. You may have heard that before. But when you turn, then the wheels are going to travel at the same speed, and one of them's going to be pulling and skidding along, and you got a good chance to break your differential. Well, you know, we looked at suspension systems and differentials, CV axles. You should be in good shape now to get out in your garage and make any repairs. Keep your car riding good, smooth, and keep the differential going good. Well, thanks for watching. From our garage to your garage, thanks for watching Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts.